Start? Okay. So thanks for trying to pronounce my last name. It's very hard, so I usually go by name Milan only. It's usually enough because it's too complicated. So I'm from Qatar National Library, and I'm managing the Department of Electronic Resources and Licensing. And one of our roles is to support researchers in the country, all researchers in Qatar. I have to stress this, and I'll stress it many times during the presentation, with the publishing. So because we're a national library, we're quite unique, and I'll walk you through this during the presentation. So let me start now with telling you just briefly about QNL. I promise briefly. So we're National Public and Research Library. In the last few years, we're mostly public library, but we still have a strong, of course, national and research role. And our research role has been evolving constantly, like many things here in Doha, right? So we've been trying to see how, as a national library, we can support research in the country, because UDST has its own library, all the universities have their own libraries, medical corporations have their own libraries, so we're trying to coordinate our work with them and help them with the research part. And how we do that? We do that mostly through providing the resources or expertise for electronic resources, or resources that are important for scholarly communication. So we acquired the agreements, and we have also formed the consortia, and UDST is a part of that consortia. It's called Qatar National Library Consortia, and it's been going on for like 7 years now. It's a loose consortia, but it's working quite well because we have managed to reduce the cost for all institutions and provide more resources. Of course, for the national part, I will not read the slide, but we are also having 8 or 10 pillars. It's changing depending on the year, and one of the pillars is support research and support open access publishing. And why? Because we want to preserve the research output, and also we think it's aligned with the country's vision 2030, and just disseminating to a broader world the research that's done in Qatar, especially for in scholarly communications, we call the Global South, and I think in the research, countries that don't have access to funds or research equipment, so they cannot produce the research, but they do have still trying to educate researchers, and they try to compete. So we want to make the research that's made in Qatar publicly available to everyone. So this was a brief introduction. Today I'll try to cover about our open access. About open access in general, sadly it's 2024 and there are still some misunderstandings. And I've been doing these kind of presentations with my colleague, Dr. Walid, who's running the open access at Qatar National Library. And actually, just to disclaimer, these are his slides. I'm covering up for him. So anything that is good, I will take credit for. Anything that's bad, you can email him. Later on, I'll provide his email address. I'll talk about the Open Access Fund, and I'll talk about the repository that we have recently established. So yeah, the question, I'm still kind of bothered in 2024 that we are addressing this, like why open access? And the problem is why is there some misunderstandings about what open access is and what open access is not. And it's also quite common in Qatar, at least on the research bodies at Qatar University, for example, or QNRF, they think that the open access research is of a lower quality. Open access and quality are not correlated. So then we start with a question like, okay, if you publish an article and no one has read it, or no one has access to it, has it been published, right? And how we can increase and maximize our research output, right? Because we've noticed, and it's covered in the literature, right, in studies, that open access articles are getting more visibility, more citations. If the research is of certain quality, it's good to be disseminated broader because you will get more citations. If it's not, you will again get a critic, so you will improve as a researcher. So we think exposure and openness is good for the research in general. Again, one of the questions that touches on the Global South again, is why open access, because access is a problem. We're in Qatar, so we have relatively stable budgets for subscriptions, but there is no single library in the world, like Ivy League colleges, big research centers like CERN, big Max Planck. They don't have all the resources that they need. So there is no library or a research institution that can afford all the resources that the researchers would need because the subscription is too expensive. So that's why we think with open access, we would at least open up more of the research. And that's one of the reasons like why we started this as at the National Library, because we have identified that with our subscription spending on a state level, we can use it as a leverage and try to log the prices and include the publishing in the open access publishing in our agreements, subscription agreements. Also, please feel free to interrupt me at any point if anyone has any question or comment. We'll have time for the questions later, but during the presentations, if you want to ask something, please. I don't want this to be only like a monologue. So, why would you want your research papers to be open, right? It can be modified, it can be free to use, and can be shared with anyone with any purpose. Quite often, we receive a request from a researcher in Qatar saying, can you please get me my article? Because I want to share it with my colleagues. Researchers, being busy with doing research, they don't have time to read complicated copyright agreements that they sign with the publishers. So anytime you publish behind the paywall, your paper belongs to a publisher. We think that's fundamentally wrong. And especially some publishers will give you 20 copies of your own paper to disseminate. So that's why we think, okay, open access is a solution for this. Open access is, of course, not a solution for everything. It's just a niche area that we as a library can contribute and help. There are many other problems with the research evaluation, research lifecycle, journals. I mean, you're working in academia and you are researchers, so you know what are the problems much better than I do. How, with the open access, there are also licenses, but you can choose what kind of license you want to put on your paper. And that's something that is, again, confusing to researchers, because they think if my paper is open, so anybody can take it and do whatever it wants with it without giving me any credit. That's not true. People can still misuse your paper even if it's behind the paywall. But with open access, you can choose your license and the level of permissions you want to give to persons who will use your paper. I will not talk a lot about this because it's not complicated, it's just overwhelming, and researchers, they don't care about the copyright in most cases because they want the research to be published as soon as possible, disseminated to as broad as audience as possible. I've touched on this, so basically some of the reasons why we are supporting open access. Let's go through them now. 2024, and I still have to address some of these problems, which I see as a failure of us librarians or scholarly communications librarians who are constantly in touch with the researchers. So access is a problem. As I mentioned earlier, it's a big problem. It is expensive. Any research library, 80% of the budget goes for the subscription. So I'll share the slides. I think they will be publicly available. So open access articles are not peer-reviewed. That's another big myth that we are facing quite often. So that's simply not true. Of course, like in every business model, there are companies or entities who will try to find ways and loopholes to misuse it. And usually in life, if it's too good to be true, it's probably not good for you. So there is some catch. So we try to educate researchers to first do a simple check of a website or a journal they're going to publish. Most of the researchers are aware of journals where they want to publish, so they know it because they're reading. But some young or inexperienced or researchers, would want to publish as soon as possible. Of course, we know because that's all tied to the projects, grants, or to promotions, or to tenure. So it's a really fundamentally flawed system that we're trying to make some sense out of it. And some of the publishers or some of the companies are misusing it because they're creating fake journals that will just take money and promise you quick publishing. But in the end, you will get your papers not retracted, but they will not be indexed anywhere or visible because these are predatory journals. That's another problem or myth. Open access costs, but it's not authors who would bear that cost. There are many options for covering the fees for open access publishing. And as a national library, we are trying to centralize this. So there should be no cost for you as end users. So we would fall in the category of APC funds as a library. Again, this is similar to peer review. It was, 10 years ago, it was we were debating this, but now, how many of researchers wants to publish in Nature's Communications, which is one of the biggest and fastest growing open access journal. Actually, the biggest journal in the world. So that's simply not the case. And then there is a problem of impact factor, but I'll try not to talk about that unless someone really wants to discuss. So we have done a survey, and I know this is too small, so I'll just give you the overview. So 70% and 73% of researchers said, best journal for disseminating my research, and I want to increase the visibility of my research. And for us, that's also a clear and no-brainer that we are on the right track. So what we as a national library we want to do, we want to avoid this situation, kind of. 74% of researchers responded that they are somehow influenced by the availability of the agreements that we have when they're making decision to publish. I don't know how to go to this previous slide, but on the previous slide, they're still choosing the journals that is the most important for them. But, sorry for this, but they are also heavily influenced by the availability of the funds. So our role as a national library is to expand as much as we can the agreements, the journals, with all the publishers, because we don't want to steer the research. And it's also hard. We noticed in few cases when researchers move from one journal to another. But from your own experience, and I guess from our experience as librarians, we see that the researchers tend to stick to the journals that they've been using during their studies, that are the most reputable in their subject areas. So they will not change journals so easily, unless there is a chase for grant, for promotion. So how we do this? I've said this a few times, it's good to have it on the slide as well. We want to preserve the research output, and we want to support every single researcher in the country with the open access publishing fee. Again, I've touched upon these points, and when we started in 2016, it was very hard to explain why we're doing this, even to our executive director, why we would now spend money to something that will not directly benefit QNL users, right? And our point is let's look at the big picture. We're a national library, we support other institutions with the negotiations, we provide them the service, and basically after a few years, we'll have enough data to start lobbying and asking for more funds to make this really a sustainable service. This is not something we have made up. However, we were early adopters. There is an initiative in Europe which has become global called OE 2020. And many countries have so-called transformative agreements. So the agreements, subscription agreements, that will allow open access publishing. And that number, as you can see, is growing. And Qatar is here. We're probably tiny bit here, but on the next slide, I'll show you the distribution. So the percentage of the agreements that are covered and that are open access. So Qatar is here, which is roughly around 50%, but that's because our data is old. So we have a team and we have failed to submit the data for 22 and 23. We will actually be in top 10 for sure. We're around 70% of the availability now. So it's also a reminder for me that we have to also keep up with our work and disseminate this information, because when we fund an article based on the article identifier, we deposit all of these articles in this initiative called ISAC. ISAC, somewhere, it's probably here. And they process the data, so we get global transparency, which is beautiful for us. We know what's the average APC for every single publisher globally, and we can also check what's the average price that we are paying. So how far are we from the average? And it is giving us, I would like to say, like a level playing field, because when the publishers come to negotiate with us, with you about the subscription deals, they have an overview of the whole world and how much Kuwait is paying, how much libraries in Oman, in the region, in Asia, in Europe, how much they're paying for this exact collection. Well, while I have no clue, and we want the same, at least to start negotiating on the same terms. So we're currently higher up. I hope numbers will be there, but also you can see which countries are doing and what's the percentage of the research output that's open access. So basically, one of the strong arguments, I don't have to convince researchers why to publish, because now like 70 or 80% of UK, Ireland, Germany should be also somewhere up. Netherlands is smaller, but where is Germany? Denmark. Someone says Germany? Well, okay, Germany. So US is lagging behind, right? China, okay, China, Estonia. Okay, you see US. And that's the biggest problem, because US accounts for a huge chunk of research. But now, as a researchers, if you want to read articles from any of these countries, 80% of the chance that these articles are fully open and open to read and free to read. And now the question is, okay, but what we are continue to paying the subscription for which publications? So we're trying to change this subscription model, and we're not doing this alone. Qatar is relatively insignificant globally when it comes to research. We publish around 2,500 articles. Half of them are corresponding authors. But still, we want all of this to be open access, and we want to contribute to the global initiative. This is how many articles we have funded since the beginning of, since 2018. 2016 and 17 were pilot years when we had vouchers. So it was a very low number of articles, like, let's say around 40. But then we have started creating these transformative agreements, transitional agreements, where we have included publishing within the agreement. And the numbers keep growing. I've pulled out some data for UDST. But again, you guys were become university like 2 years ago, right? So I would say these numbers are quite good. Again, we have high rejection rate, relatively speaking, for UDST. And there are two main reasons. Usually is lack of the funding. So we simply don't have money to cover everything, or it was rejected because the papers would not meet our criteria. So our criteria, we don't evaluate research because we are not competent. We have a criteria for funding, and I'll walk you through that criteria in a few slides. Most common reason for rejection is fund exhausted. And we see this across the board with all the institutions in Qatar. We're aware of that. We're working to improve this. but we're still trying to cover as much as we can. So criteria, it's quite simple. It's not set in stone. We're trying to create a formal group that will pull out researchers from different institutions, where we will have almost like a governing board or advisory board on how we want to move forward with funds, because we're trying to listen. So the fund is our initiative as a National Library, but we're not saying it's perfect. Actually, it's work in progress. And we're constantly trying to talk to researchers. That's what I'm doing now, to try to understand what are your needs, what you think is bad with the fund. Actually, I want to hear really what you don't like so we can improve. But criteria is simple. You have to confirm that you have exhausted all the other sources just by saying we don't have money, we don't have any other source, we believe you. A corresponding author must be affiliated with Qatar-based institution. So this is for practical reasons. You saw the slide with the countries distribution. And I mean, some of you might be surprised, but the publishers have no clue who's paying for what from which country. So there is a universal agreement among this open access initiative that we fund only corresponding authors affiliated to institutions to avoid double payments. So it's only the corresponding author who's affiliated with Qatari institutions. So it doesn't have to be a Qatari, any researcher with Qatari affiliation. And the journals have to meet our criteria. We'll come to the criteria soon. I'm sorry for this. Okay, it won't happen. We have two ways with the agreements that we have with the publishers, which is, in our opinion, simpler, and then we have the application. So again, our goal is not to direct you where to publish. We cannot have the agreements with every single publisher. That's why we call it a petty cash, even though it's not a petty. It's a huge amount that we keep aside. And if researchers approach us and say, this is the fully open access journals, I want to publish here, if we have funds, we will support. So publisher route is easier, and we are not involved in any peer review or any, we don't read the articles, we don't care, because first we don't have expertise, and it's not our role. So basically, once the article is submitted to publisher, actually when it's accepted, we get a notification, and authors get notification that they can make it open access. This system is not perfect, things fall through the cracks, but again, we're constantly working with the publishers and trying to simplify this. For example, you want to submit paper to Springer Nature, journal that is eligible. We made a default open access. So you have to opt out if you really don't want. When we have tried with opting in, it's confusing because publishers are using convoluted wording with payments, and researchers or authors, when they see the payments, they don't want them to be charged, they don't want their libraries to be charged, they get confused. So we have literally the screenshots of every single step with every single publisher that you guys are seeing, and we're constantly trying to tweak them and make them as smooth as possible. So yeah, information about the fund are on our website, and you can Google it. Why the publisher route is easier? Approval is faster, means you're identified as eligible, your article is accepted, we just click on a button and we approve. There is no need for any invoices or payments, no need to fill in the form or application, because we have the agreements. APC is less expensive, that's debatable. I have one example. I have example of the agreements. There are two columns. So these are fully open access publishers, and these are subscription publishers. So with the subscription publishers, we are trying to get unlimited publishing. We are almost there. If not, we are getting the number that is the closest that can be to our research output. So for example, Elsevier, we have 360 articles this year, and our research output is around 400, give or take. And Springer Nature, we have 150. Unused articles are rolled over. So we're trying to either, if we have a number, fixed number of articles, we try to make it as close as possible to unlimited. We're constantly adding publishers to this list. And with the money we have saved from these agreements, a few years back, we have invested in fully open access publishers. When I say invested, we deposited certain amount of funds, let's say $50,000. For that money, we have got a discount of 5 to 15%, depends on the publisher. For us and for researchers, it's incredible amount of saving for the admin work and processing time, because there's no need for your procurement to issue invoice, pay, cover, chase it. We do all of that with one deposit, and they just deduct. So it's similar. These agreements are similar to the subscription agreements. The problem is people are publishing way too much with the fully open access publishers, and the money runs out quickly. There are debates about frontiers and MDPI constantly. Are they predatory? Are they misusing? Are they of good quality? I can touch upon that if you want, but what we are doing is we are looking at the available citation data from Web of Science, from Scopus, from Dimensions. We look at the publishing amount, and we're trying to deposit money with those publishers. And as long as the journals are listed on the OAJ, we will support it. So that's what I mentioned. We're constantly updating, so please check our website for any updates. So these are some of the things that we try to make sure publishers do. Identification, depending on the publisher. Now it's way better than it was 2 or even a year ago. They're all improving because it's, for publishers, it's a new revenue stream, and now they want, of course, they want to capture everything because they lose money if they don't. So it's improving. We have three ways of author identification. Sometimes all 3 are enabled, so that's perfect. So if you submit a paper from Qatar IP, it will flag you, it will check your email, we'll get a notification. And affiliation, of course. We verify every single author, not because we're control freaks, but just because we need to make sure that we are paying for the eligible authors. It's very simple. Every single paper goes through our team. And we approve the articles on the dashboard, or depends if we don't have the agreement with publishers, we do the paperwork. This is the part that's quite tricky, and we have identified it as a pain point, big one. Identification at the submission or once article has been accepted. It's very hard to keep track if the money is deducted at the submission, because rejection rates are quite high with most of the publishers. However, counter argument is that that's what authors and researchers, that's what they want. You want to make sure once you have submitted, if it's accepted, you will have funds. Because it quite often, or more often than we would like, at the moment of submission, authors check, okay, we have an agreement. By the time paper is accepted, MAFI funds. So that's not something we want to do. We want to run a service that will support researchers. So we're trying to address this. We're piloting so-called pre-booking, where any author can notify us at the moment of submission, and we will book the funds for them. So just to give them peace of mind for this year. It's quite complicated, but that's at least something that we're trying to see how we can guarantee you funding once you have submitted your paper. Of course, these are more guidelines for authors. We encourage you always to use your institutional email. I know once you move to another institution, you have to track and get your research on your profile. Still, for the open access publishing, it helps us a lot when you use your institutional email. Also, if your paper is published and you have not claimed the open access, it's 50-50 chances that we can correct this. Some publishers allow, some don't. especially if it's behind the paywall, then that means that libraries have already paid for the subscription for the titles, so publishers are already making money out of the titles, so they will make it more money if we now pay them for open access. So it's a moral dilemma, but we have many of those constantly. Instructions. So we are operating within the QNL, okay? So we don't have our own website or our own page. So the design, don't blame it on us, and the outlook of the website. So we are working in the environment we have. We're trying to put the information there that you will use. But yeah, I would fully say this is like early 2000s web design. Anyhow, we try to give instructions for authors, and I put Springer Nature as an example. Again, language, we're changing it. So for us, for you guys, it's probably discount, or we want to make sure that you're aware there is no fee for you. For us, there is no fee because we paid through the subscription. Then we try to put a list of journals for every single publisher. Of course, we're working on a searchable platform where you can find all the journals instead of clicking downloading Excel files. And then we try to give detailed instructions to authors on how to apply for the vouchers. I'm just checking. This is one thing that we ask authors to do because in the long run it will help us justify the existence of the fund, the spending, and it's also helping us to, through the metadata harvesting, to keep track of what we have funded. So of course we're keeping track on multiple points. So this is just another one that when we embed the acknowledgement in the paper itself, so once we scrap it, we can get the statements. I mean, we say it's a requirement, of course, we will not reject your paper if the acknowledgement is not there. We'll try to work with publishers to add it, but we like to say it's a requirement. I mentioned this, so not all the journals can be part of the agreement. Those that are not, we have a sum. We have a form on our website that you have to fill. Decision process, open access committee, it's me and Alvalid who's presenting. We just review if the journal is eligible. We don't even read the name of the author or title of the paper. We just check the journal, eligible, we get a notification, and then the payment process, it's procurement. We put 60 days. It can be 100, it can be 40, but it will be paid. The issue that we have noticed is authors are receiving reminders for payment. So I'm sorry for that. There's not much we can do except paying faster, which doesn't depend on us. But we are communicating with publishers. Those are automated messages that publishers are sending, and they don't want you to get them as well. So we're trying to remove those reminders as much as we can. But once you get a confirmation from us, it will be paid. Don't pay. So no matter how many reminders you get, don't pay, because if you pay, there's no way for us to reimburse you. So that's something that I want to stress. I'll try to stress it one more time at least. We have a funding limit for APCs. Again, we're following the global averages. It used to be 2,000 and 2,500, now it's 3,000. We're all aware of the inflation. Again, second time, pays publishers directly, no reimbursement. So please, if you want open access, come to us first, don't pay. We will do everything we can to process this as soon as possible because we are aware of the deadlines and pressures that you have. So the only reason why we would reject if the journal is eligible if we don't have funds. What we are doing is talking with institutions and trying to see if they are willing, if the research office who's already funding some of the publications, if they're willing to funnel this money to QNL, and benefit to them is that it will reduce the cost of administrative work and procuring the articles, and it will guarantee that money will be used for researchers from that institutions. And actually we have done a pilot with UDST late last year. It was successful, so we look forward to expand this. Again, also important to stress, we will never charge for this service because we are a national library. We want to run the service for you, so we will never take any fee for the service. However, we do need funds for the research papers for your researchers. That's very clear. So if you get caught in this crack where you have submitted and then we don't have funds, there are a few options that you can do. You can always publish behind the paywall for subscription journals, but for the fully open access, it rarely happens, but it happens. So, and it's also, we try to work with publishers to include this in the top up if possible. We try to minimize the suffering of authors. And with that, I think I'm done with open access. If you want, we can skip the questions for later or some questions now. No questions? Yes, please. How can I go back? The red one. Okay. Sorry. So it really depends. This year we had an awkward situation because, for example, Frontiers and MDPI, we have central agreements with them, but we used cash to process some of the articles because we didn't pay for the central agreements. So we had to close the application, so there was some confusion. But usually our budgets are annually with the fully open access publishers. So those on the list, I can go back. Just to give you the... Yes. Okay. So with all of these, it's a prepayment. So we pay them once a year or twice a year, depending on the available funds. So when we are down to, let's say, 4 articles, we try to top up if we have money. Usually we do. And then if your paper is published with some publisher that's not here, that's another fund that we usually don't run out until November.
No, I'm talking about IEEE in my case.
Okay, so IEEE is what?
For example, also you at any time of the year you may say that you are run out of. Right?
So that we're trying to also put on the website like information on the number of available articles. With IEEE, I guarantee you we will not run out of articles.
So there is a quota for every.
Then it's close to unlimited. So we have 175 with IEEE, and our total output was 105 last year. So we should not run out of money. It's possible. If that's the case with the subscription-based publishers, if it's a mid-term, let's say it's a first or second year of subscription, there is another year, we ask them to pull money from this next year to use for this one. And then we try to add more for the next year.
So the pre-booking, as we talk also about pre-booking, pre-booking is not yet in place, right?
No, it is. It's a pilot.
So
we're piloting it now. It's in place.
For both columns or just
For everything.
for everything?
Yes. Elsevier is here. Elsevier is the biggest and the most expensive publisher. We have 360 for this year. We use them usually all by October, November. So if your paper is accepted in November, 50-50, I would say.
It's the previous year. It's not for the submission was in the previous year, and for this year, it is accounted.
If its submission is previous year, at the moment of the acceptance. So once it's accepted, if we have vouchers, we will fund it.
That information is available where on the website,
It should be on the instructions.
in the other instructions.
It should be like it should be in every publisher's instructions. If it's not there, we will put it.
Do we require to add any acknowledgement in the publication itself?
Just in the abstract, just the funding of the publication was covered by QNL. consortia.
Because once we submit it and when we reach at the stage of acceptance, we may not be able to add it.
Yeah, we can add it with publishers. It's not a problem in most cases.
Also, we need to inform the publisher.
We copy authors on the communication. So either you inform them or we inform them. Please.
Hi, Milan. We have corresponded in the past, and I'd like to thank QNL for funding a few of our publications. Earlier this year, there was an incident, and I just want to raise that if there's a solution for that, where we had checked with QNL from the listing, and then we actually wrote to QNL and we received the approval, yes, go ahead, and we submitted to a journal on the listing, and by the time it got accepted, when QNL was maybe contacted by the journal, the agreement with the publisher, I'm not sure which publisher it was, it had ended. And so QNL would not fund. And so we corresponded further, but that was a decision. And we were lucky that we turned to the university and the university decided to pay for it. Could there be, once QNL makes a commitment in a way, yes, we'll fund for this, it's an acceptable journal, it's an acceptable manuscript, whatever, that there is some protection that in case an agreement expires or you run out of funds, there could be some contingency funding to honor that commitment?
Thanks for this. And actually, these are the examples that I want to hear because I don't know which exactly journal was, but we have these incidents quite often. So if you know, it would help me to look into it. But what we do, so there is a possibility of human error, okay? So we honor, if it's a human error, we honor the commitment if it's our human error. Because we have 2 full-time staff who are doing the admin work. We have created many templates for their correspondence. Sometimes it sounds too generic or like robots, so we want them to be more human. If it happened this year, it shouldn't have happened because there is no contract that ended except Frontiers and MDPI. Elsevier, I remember November, accepted the article, we didn't have funds, yes. But Frontiers was this year. Yes, so Frontiers and MDPI, you really have to use pre-booking. Because for sure you have not received, we will fund it before it was accepted, right? Yes. Exactly. So that's the pain point that I've also identified. So once you go today, and you check, you go today. Sorry. Pre-booking, we call it. That's what we created. Pre-booking. So if you apply today for Frontiers, all. We're piloting it. It's complicated for us, but that's, again, we are running this for you. So we want this kind of feedback because we don't want, unhappy researchers. That's not what we want. And we for sure don't want to let you down. So we will honor, if it's our mistake, for sure we'll honor. If we have funds, and if it's a fully open access, like Frontiers, we can pay. But if it's a subscription like Elsevier, there's not much we can do. So that's the problem. So Elsevier, there is always, just have this on mind, at the end of the year, closer to November, we might run out of funds for Elsevier. So only if you pre-book, that will guarantee you the article will be used. Yes, but then it complicates the discussion because with Elsevier, we pay them through one deal for everything. We don't make distinction. We pay them lump sum, and we get articles across these. So if it's fully open access, then there is a chance that we can fund you from another money. There is option. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. So the limit 3 per author per year, is it like for all the publishers? Like for example, for IEEE applicable, like in total must be 3 per author per year, or?
So when we established the fund, okay, we're librarians. and Al-Walid is a researcher as well. So we were like, okay, how many articles research teams can produce in a year, having in mind the whole peer review, acceptance, review process? We found that the discussions with colleagues from other countries, we found that 3 articles is a good average number for authors to put a cap on. So that's why we introduced the cap, just to avoid consumption, but mostly here. So we're more worried with the cap with Frontiers, MDPI, for example, because it's a fast acceptance. So if it's IEEE, and if we have more articles, it's not set in stone. It's case by case. So if your paper is accepted here, and we have articles, you have more than 3 papers, we have vouchers, of course, we will let you use it. So we're trying to approach this with common sense and to support you. So anything that you find illogical or it's not working, we're happy to modify it. And I'm sure that many mistakes we have done.
So get funded if you are the first author or
Corresponding only. Only corresponding.
So I can be the first author at the first time. Next time, somebody else could be a corresponding author, so he can apply.
Yes. So corresponding authors has to have affiliation from Qatar.
Yes, I know. But I mean, I can be the first author, corresponding author the first time. Next time, I can be the first author, but somebody else could be a
Yes, no problem. You mean for the cap, you want to play with the cap. I mean, no, that's the thing, no need. No need, because we want to support you. Okay, so cap is there just to help us manage funds with these, mostly. And that was the average number that we could pull up. So just approach us and tell us, look guys, this is important. These are 4th, 5th article. With HMC, we have one author who's coordinating research teams, and usually he's corresponding. So he has 15 articles, but it's different teams. So we talk to them, we understood the situation, and we support them. We don't reject when we see professor that and that.
Actually, there is 2 questions from my side. I'm sorry if I missed that information. Mostly in your first
No
slide,
worries.
because I came late. Is there any type of articles that you will consider, or all type of articles?
So that's the thing that we are trying with the advisory. So question was, are there any types of articles that we will limit or cancel? So at this moment, no. But that's something that we have identified as a potential way to improve the fund, let's put it that way. Because we are accepting review cases, genuine research articles. So we accept.
The second question is in terms of the distribution of the fund. We are academic side, and we are always finding difficulties in getting the data collected, and obviously particularly to the medical field. And there will be a lot coming from the medical side, maybe from Qatar and other hospitals here in Qatar. So do you have any categorical distribution for the academic researchers, which is one of the target for Qatar Vision 2030? So is there anything that can be considered for future, like have specific fund for the academic research and the hospital and the clinical research?
Thank you. So we're, again, our goal is to support everyone with everything, so we don't have to put any limitations. As long as the majority of the fund is coming from QNL budget, we cannot put limitations or allocate certain amount of articles, because it's unpredictable. You may not publish enough, and we end up with articles sitting there. So that's why unused vouchers. So that's why we are reforming on first come, first served basis. However, if your institution, we're coordinating, and your institution is willing to deposit amount of money, the terms of the deposit will be the ones your institution sets. So if they say these articles goes only for this subject area, this work, no problem. So that's the way how we can, in the long run, allocate some amounts. But as long as we are funding it from our money, it will be first come, first serve. Because simply we don't think it would be fair. We're willing to discuss, but it would be extremely hard for us also to maintain these vouchers for different groups, and then pulling out, it would create a mess and more unhappy researchers, which is not something that we want. Sorry. Oh, more questions? Okay. I have a few more slides. Sorry. I know. I'll talk briefly about this because it's totally not my cup of tea. So I'll try to cover it as best as I can. So recently we have developed a Qatar research repository called Manara. And the idea is, besides supporting you for funding, you can also deposit things in the repository. Again, why we're doing this? As a national library, we think we can help smaller institutions who don't have funding to run the repository to create their own, like a niche area in our repository, in the national repository. And okay, we'll get the slides. So basically, with this repository, we want to capture not only research papers, but everything you want to dump in it. Like, it's like your institutional repository. Today you have this professional development and tomorrow conference. Maybe some of the papers you want to put there. You can decide on the level of access. You can put the licenses. It's basically your institutional repository. It is just fee and maintenance is covered by us, so we will not charge institutions for this. We do sign MOU, and I'll mention that, I hope, on one of the next slides. So basically, we have few options with the institutional deposits, or you can also deposit directly to the National Library if you want. And now we are going, again, talking to institutions across the country and showing this, because it seems that it's a service that many institutions would benefit, especially the smaller ones. And there are few technical points, right? Again, if someone from UDST will deposit, or if we create your own repository, you will have an admin in your library who will review the content and set the authentication levels according to your institutional demands. So there's nothing that we control here. So it's basically a free service for institutions in the country if you need a repository. I want to show you, yes, so we launched it. And what I like really with QNL, and especially my department, we try to do things, and then we go and get the money, get the funds. So we launched it very quietly in November last year, and we got 3,000 posts, 100,000 views, which I think it's quite a good number, especially if I look and compare with e-resources, and huge number of downloads. This is just generic growth, word of mouth. And then we have signed an MOU with you a few months ago, and I also think the numbers are quite impressive for like just 2 months of you depositing your data in Manara. So honestly, I don't know much about Manara, as you can probably guess, but it's a research repository that we are providing, and you guys have signed an MOU, so you have a place to deposit research papers, posters, data, anything you want. And institutions, I put the list of institutions who are currently depositing the content, and this number will just grow. Again, I've mentioned it briefly.